She only said 4 words, "Come in for tea." But the way her eyes lingered, the way her voice softened, I knew this invitation carried more than just tea. It carried secrets she'd never shared with anyone else. I'd seen her countless times before, always from a distance. The widow across the street. Her presence carried a kind of quiet grace, like someone who wasn't trying to be noticed, yet somehow always was. She walked her garden in the early mornings, hair tied loosely, a book in her hand when she sat on the porch. Neighbors greeted her politely, but rarely lingered. Maybe it was respect. Maybe it was the invisible space grief had drawn around her. I never thought much would pass between us beyond the occasional wave until that afternoon. The sky was soft with the kind of golden light that makes everything look gentler. I had just come back from a run, sweat cooling on my skin, when I saw her at the edge of her driveway. She stood there as if she'd been waiting for something, or maybe someone. And then, for the first time, her eyes settled directly on me. "Would you like to come in for tea?" For simple words. Yet they struck me in a way I didn't expect. There was no casual neighborly tone in her voice, no offhand smile. Instead, her voice held a softness, an invitation layered with something quieter, almost hesitant. I froze for a moment. She must have noticed, because her lips curved into the faintest smile, not bold, not playful, but something caught between courage and vulnerability. I nodded. "I'd like that." Crossing the street felt heavier than it should have. My footsteps seemed louder against the pavement, like I was stepping into a space I had no business entering. Her gate creaked as she opened it, and the faint scent of roses from her garden drifted in the air. Inside, her house was exactly what I imagined, warm, but touched with silence. Photographs lined the mantel, her husband, younger days, family gatherings frozen in time. There was love in those pictures, but also absence. She guided me to the sitting room, where sunlight spilled through thin curtains and painted her face in soft gold. She moved with a natural elegance, not the kind that demanded attention, but the kind that lingered when you least expected it. "Please sit," she said, gesturing to the couch. Her voice was gentle, low, carrying a steadiness that made me want to listen. The clink of porcelain came from the kitchen, the faint hiss of boiling water, and soon the room filled with the delicate fragrance of jasmine tea. She returned carrying a tray, and when she leaned forward to place it on the table, a strand of hair slipped from her bun, brushing her cheek. I should have looked away, but I didn't. Her eyes met mine as she handed me a cup, her fingers grazing mine for only a second, just long enough to feel the quiet warmth of her skin. And in that moment, it became clear, this wasn't just tea. This was the beginning of something neither of us had expected. The cup in my hands was warm, almost too warm, as if it was reminding me to stay present. She sat across from me, her back straight but her shoulders just a little too still, like she was trying to hold herself together. The delicate porcelain cup looked small in her hands, her fingers resting against it with a careful steadiness. For a moment, the room felt too quiet. Only the ticking of a small clock on the mantel filled the air. I wondered if she regretted inviting me in. I wondered if I should speak first. But then, her eyes lifted to mine. "So, you've lived across the street for what? 2 years now?" she asked, her voice carrying a trace of amusement. "Almost 3, I replied, smiling. "Though I guess this is the first real conversation we've had." Her lips curved slightly, a smile that didn't fully reach her eyes but softened her face nonetheless. "I don't invite people in very often," she admitted. Her honesty caught me off guard. There was no politeness covering her words, no neighborly small talk. Just truth, spoken quietly, as if it were both a confession and a warning. I nodded slowly. "Then I'm honored, I guess." The faintest laugh escaped her, a sound gentle enough to break the heaviness in the room. "Don't make it sound like such a privilege. It's just tea." But I didn't believe her. The way she said it, the careful way she looked down at her cup after, told me there was more to it. We began to talk, cautiously at first, like strangers testing the water before stepping in. She asked about my work, my family, my days spent coming and going while she watched from her porch. She listened in a way most people don't, with pauses, with stillness, with eyes that seemed to measure the spaces between my words as much as the words themselves. And as I spoke, I realized how rare that was. Her presence made me notice things differently. The faint crack of the wood floor when she shifted her chair closer, the soft rustle of her sleeve as she adjusted the tray, the lavender scent that clung to her like something familiar yet distant. At one point, her hand moved across the table, reaching for the sugar bowl. For a second, her fingers brushed the back of mine. Light, accidental, yet it lingered in my skin long after she pulled away. Neither of us mentioned it. Neither of us had to. The conversation circled back to me again, but I could feel the spaces where her own story sat untouched, like unopened pages of a book. She deflected gently, turning the questions back toward me, but in her silences, I sensed something heavier, something she wasn't ready to share. And though I didn't push, I knew then, she hadn't invited me in just for tea. She had invited me in because she wanted to be seen. It happened on my third visit. By then, our conversations had settled into an easy rhythm. Small stories about my day, quiet laughter that softened the edges of her solitude. Yet, even with the warmth building between us, I could sense it. There was something she hadn't said. That evening, the air outside was heavy with the scent of rain. The first drops tapped softly against the window as she poured our tea, her movements slower than usual, as if each one carried a weight. I watched her hand tremble ever so slightly when she set the teapot down. She noticed me noticing and gave a faint, apologetic smile. "I'm sorry," she murmured, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. "Some days feel heavier than others." I wanted to ask why, but instead, I just nodded. We all have days like that. Her eyes lifted to mine, steady but shadowed. "Do we?" she whispered, almost as if she didn't believe it. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was fragile, like glass you didn't dare touch. Finally, she exhaled and leaned back against the chair, her fingers absently reaching for the locket that rested against her chest. I had seen it before, glinting in the light, but this was the first time she touched it in front of me. "This was his," she said quietly. "Her husband." I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The shift in her tone told me everything. "We were married 20 years, she continued, her thumb tracing the edge of the silver locket. "He was kind, steady, the sort of man everyone could count on. And then one day, he was just gone." Her words broke gently, not like a storm, but like something unraveling thread by thread. She kept her gaze fixed on the locket, as though afraid that looking at me would make her voice falter completely. The room seemed to shrink, the rain outside pressing closer against the windows. I felt my chest tighten, not just from sympathy, but from the realization that this was the first time she was letting someone step into her grief. I leaned forward, my voice low. "I'm sorry. I can't imagine how hard that must have been." She gave a small, tired smile. "Everyone says that, and they mean well, I know. But what no one ever says is how strange it feels to keep living when someone else's life has stopped. To sit in the same rooms, touch the same furniture, and feel like a ghost in your own home." Her honesty shook me, not because of the sorrow in her words, but because of the courage it took to share them. For a moment, I didn't think. I just reached across the table and let my hand rest lightly over hers. She didn't pull away. Her fingers twitched beneath mine, and then stilled, as if she had been waiting far too long for someone to bridge the silence. When her eyes finally lifted to mine, there was no smile, no pretense, just raw truth. And in that moment, I understood. This wasn't about filling her loneliness with company. It was about being allowed to see the parts of her no one else had touched since he was gone. It surprised me when she invited me again, this time not for tea, but for dinner. Her voice carried that same quiet hesitation, but there was something else in it too, a spark of courage. "I thought it might be nice to share a meal," she said, almost as if she were afraid I would refuse. I didn't. I couldn't. That evening, her home felt different. Warmer somehow, though nothing had changed. The table was set simply, a candle flickering at its center, casting gentle light across the dishes she'd prepared. The air carried the scent of herbs and roasted vegetables, mingling with something sweeter I couldn't quite place. She greeted me at the door with a softness that made my chest tighten. No polite formality this time, just a quiet relief, as though she had been waiting for me. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble," I said as I stepped inside. She tilted her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Maybe I wanted to. We sat across from each other, the candlelight flickering between us. At first, it was quiet, the clink of silverware, the muted crackle of the candle wick. But then she asked about my day, and I asked about hers, and little by little, the silence gave way to something lighter. Laughter. It startled me the first time. The way it slipped out of her, unguarded and warm, like sunlight breaking through clouds. And once it came, it kept returning. Small jokes, playful remarks, shared amusement over the way the candle sputtered, as if protesting our conversation. I found myself leaning in, drawn closer not just by her words, but by the way her eyes lit up when she smiled. It was the first time I'd seen her face without the weight of sorrow pressing it down, and it was breathtaking. At one point, as she passed me a dish, her hand brushed against mine again. It should have been nothing, a casual mistake. But neither of us moved right away. The touch lingered, warm and deliberate, until she finally looked at me, her expression unreadable. My heart pounded. I wanted to speak, to tell her what that touch stirred in me, but the words refused to come. Instead, I gave her the smallest smile, one that said I felt it too. The rest of the evening flowed easily. Stories traded back and forth, laughter slipping in where sorrow once sat. She spoke a little more of herself, not of grief this time, but of memories, of travel, of books that still sat waiting on her shelf. By the time we finished dessert, I realized I didn't want to leave. And judging by the way she walked me to the door slowly, almost reluctantly, I sensed she didn't want me to either. As I stepped back across the street that night, the glow of her home lingering behind me, one truth pulsed quietly in my chest. Something between us was changing, and neither of us could pretend not to feel it. It was raining again the next time I visited. The steady rhythm of drops against the window filled the silence between us as we sat with our tea. But unlike before, the quiet wasn't comfortable. It was thick, as though she was carrying something she hadn't yet decided to share. She kept glancing at me, then away, her fingers circling the rim of her teacup without lifting it. Finally, she set the cup down, her hands trembling just enough for me to notice. "There's something I should tell you," she began. Her voice was soft, but beneath it was a weight, the kind that pressed against her chest and made each word feel harder than it should. I leaned forward slightly, waiting. She exhaled, eyes fixed on the table. "People think I'm strong. They think because I keep the house in order, because I smile when they pass on the street, that I've managed. But the truth is," she paused, her throat tightening, "most nights, the silence in this house feels unbearable." Her words hit me harder than I expected, not because of their sadness, but because of the honesty in them. "I've tried to reach out before," she continued, her voice faltering. "Tried to let someone in. But it's complicated. People judge. They whisper. They look at me like I've broken some rule just for wanting company again, for wanting to feel alive." She finally looked up, and the vulnerability in her eyes nearly undid me. There was no mask, no strength for show, just a woman, tired of holding everything inside. I swallowed, searching for the right words. "There's nothing wrong with wanting that," I said quietly. Her gaze lingered on me, searching, almost fearful. "You say that now. But when people see, when they wonder why someone like you spends so much time here," she trailed off, shaking her head. I understood what she wasn't saying. The age difference. The neighbors. The invisible lines that society loves to draw. For a moment, neither of us moved. The only sound was the rain sliding down the glass, steady and unrelenting. Finally, I spoke again, my voice steadier this time. "Let them wonder." Her breath caught, and she looked at me as though she wasn't sure if she had heard me right. I reached across the table, gently covering her hand with mine. Her skin was cool, delicate beneath my palm. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers curled slightly against mine, as if afraid to let go. Her secret wasn't scandalous. It wasn't something shameful. It was simply this. She was lonely, and she was afraid of being judged for wanting not just company, but connection. And as I sat there, holding her hand in the quiet, I realized something too. She hadn't chosen me by accident. She had chosen me because, for some reason, she trusted that I wouldn't see her as broken. She trusted that I would simply see her. The night she lit the fireplace, the house felt different. It wasn't just the glow of the flames, though the amber light made the room softer, warmer. It was the quiet, not heavy with sorrow this time, but with something unsaid, something waiting. We sat side by side on the couch, mugs of tea untouched on the table in front of us. The fire crackled, casting shifting shadows across the walls, and for the first time, I felt how close she was. Our shoulders brushed every so often, Not enough to call it deliberate, but enough to make my pulse race. Neither of us spoke much. Words felt unnecessary. The silence between us wasn't empty anymore. It was charged, alive, like the air before a storm. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see her profile in the firelight. Her eyes reflected the flames, soft and deep, and for a long moment, she didn't look away. I don't know which of us moved first. Maybe neither of us did. Maybe the space simply disappeared on its own. But suddenly, her hand was there, resting lightly over mine on the cushion between us. The touch was so subtle, so delicate, I almost wondered if I imagined it. But when her fingers pressed a little closer, curling gently against mine, the doubt vanished. My breath caught. I didn't move, afraid that any sudden motion would break the spell. The warmth of her skin seeped into me, spreading like the fire itself, steady and consuming. When I finally looked at her, really looked at her, I saw more than vulnerability. I saw longing. A longing she'd tried to silence, to bury beneath grief and fear of judgment. And now, in the quiet of her living room, it had slipped through in the form of a single, trembling touch. I turned my hand, slowly, so our palms met fully. Her fingers laced with mine, hesitant at first, then more certain, as if she was daring herself to believe it was allowed. Her lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. Instead, she leaned slightly toward me, the faintest shift, enough to close the gap between us without ever needing to move far. Her head rested against my shoulder, tentative but real. The weight of it sent a rush through me, grounding and overwhelming all at once. I could feel the steady rhythm of her breath, the warmth of her cheek through my shirt, the delicate brush of her hair against my jaw. I didn't speak either. There was nothing to say that could match what the silence already held. The fire crackled. The rain whispered faintly against the windows. And in that moment, with her hand in mine and her head resting against me, I knew we had crossed a line we couldn't step back from. But it didn't feel wrong. It felt inevitable. And for the first time, I allowed myself to stop questioning it. The fire had burned down to embers by the time either of us spoke. Her head still rested lightly against my shoulder, her hand still threaded with mine. The weight of that closeness was both steadying and terrifying. I could feel my heartbeat in every part of me, not racing wildly, but strong, deliberate, as if it knew this moment mattered. When she finally lifted her head, I expected her to pull away, to apologize, to rebuild the walls she had just let fall. But she didn't. She looked at me instead, really looked, her eyes searching mine in a way that made words seem too small. I swallowed, my throat dry. I don't want to pretend this doesn't mean something, I said quietly. Her lips parted, but she didn't interrupt. I went on. These evenings with you, they don't feel like chance. They don't feel like neighborly kindness. They feel. I hesitated, searching for the truth. They feel like home. For a long moment, she just stared at me, her expression unreadable. And then, slowly, her face softened, not into laughter, not into tears, but into something deeper. Relief. You have no idea how much I needed to hear that, she whispered. Her hand tightened around mine, not with desperation, but with quiet certainty. I've been so afraid, she admitted. Afraid of what people would say. Afraid of letting myself want something again. Afraid of wanting you. Her honesty undid me. I couldn't hold back anymore. I leaned forward, closing the space between us, and wrapped my arms gently around her. She came into the embrace without hesitation, her arms slipping around my waist, her cheek resting against my chest. The warmth of her body against mine was grounding. Her breath moved steadily, syncing with the rhythm of my heartbeat, and for a moment, the rest of the world disappeared. No whispers, no judgments, just us. I smoothed a hand through her hair, letting my fingers linger in the soft strands. You don't have to be afraid, I murmured into the quiet. Not with me. She pulled back just enough to meet my eyes again. There was no hesitation this time, no mask to hide behind. Just a smile, small, tender, but filled with trust. We'll take it slow, she said softly, as though promising it to herself as much as to me. And I nodded, because I understood. This wasn't about rushing into something. It was about building it carefully, piece by piece, on the fragile but steady ground we'd already laid. Her home no longer felt like a place of silence. The tea on the table had gone cold. The fire had dimmed to glowing coals, but none of it mattered. What mattered was the way her hand never left mine, the way her eyes held mine without fear now, and the quiet knowledge that something new had begun. Not a replacement for what she had lost, not a secret to be hidden away, but something real. And as I walked home later that night, the warmth of her embrace still clinging to me, I knew the widow across the street wasn't just my neighbor anymore. She was something far more.